Welcome to Obsessed with Assessment, the show in which we trawl the depths of assessment in education, looking for shiny gold treasures. Actually, I'm going to apologize at the start of this recording because I think our sound might not be as good as it normally is. So very sorry about that. And we're working with the sound engineer person to fix that in due course. My name is Sam Deno. I am an educator with a background in secondary schools, and I'm an innovator in EdTech. And my current passion project is this one, developing my understanding of assessment. My primary school's counterpart is Paul Duffy.
Hello, Sam. So I'm Paul. I've been in education for over 12 years in all sorts of different capacities. And I've got to grips with assessment in real life, but it's great now being part of this EdTech world to reflect on assessment in a different way. So before we get into everything, shall we hear our theme tune?
In this podcast, our aim is to keep you abreast of all things assessment. Each episode, we do a load of reading and research around a particular area of assessment so that you don't have to, unless you want to, obviously. And then we chew over what we've read for 10 or 15 minutes before arriving at some key takeaways. We aim to be practical and make suggestions about how to embed new ideas into your practice. So keep listening to the end.
Cool. So Sam, what have you been exploring this week?
Thanks for asking. I wanted to spend some time exploring the issue of fairness in assessment. In a previous episode, Paul, the one that you did on limitations, you listed you listed a range of alternatives to traditional pen and paper assessment in classrooms. And it got me to thinking that even those alternatives ultimately end up leaning on at least moderate levels of literacy. There is no way around the literacy factor. A simple example might be, so as a secondary English teacher, I might say, right, we're going to do some hot seating so that I can orally test understanding of an idea. But then I'll do the hot seating, and then at the end of the hot seating, I think, right, okay, well, so how am I going to reflect on this then? Let's get the students to write down 3 bullet points in their books or whatever. It always comes down to, right, what are you going to write down in your books at the end of it? So you have kind of highly articulate students or very arty students or students who have amazing physicality, and the education system just doesn't celebrate these people as highly as it does strongly literate students.
No, definitely. I mean, a couple of kind of things on that. It's interesting that in sort of recent government legislation in their reading framework, they kind of point out that, ultimately the curriculum is there to promote reading and writing so that students can access the curriculum, which is, as you say, it kind of all comes back to that, doesn't it, at the end? So is that equitable? Is that the way forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was thinking about this term, the term academic, and then conversely, the term non-academic. And broadly speaking, when we talk about academic, we tend to be describing people who will go far in learning because they write well. That's what academic means, and that's what we celebrate as opposed to non-academic. I found a blog by a chap called Phil Races, who is a professor, a university professor, and he was blogging about essay writing in higher education. He speaks about the limitations of using students' written responses as an assessment method. And obviously this is university education, but there's a huge amount of crossover between this and school testing. And this is what I drew from Phil Races. He said, a longer response will usually score higher than a shorter response, favoring students who are good at waffling. And I see that even in my own life. So I've got 3 children who have been through secondary school, and intellectually wise, that they're all much of a muchness. They're all very clever young people, but one of them writes and writes and writes, and they love writing, whereas another of them, he gets to the point where he's written down 2 sentences and he can't think what to write anymore. He's the one who is not celebrated academically, and yet his insights and his understanding of things are equally as strong as the one who can write and write and write. That was one of Phil Race's points. And then ease of reading. Ease of reading influences most markers. So a smooth answer, and that's his word, Phil Race's word, smooth answer is usually awarded higher marks than a jerky answer, again his word, even if the latter is actually more effective. He also says handwritten responses are a reflection of what comes out of a pen rather than what's in a head. Now, these are not academic, they're anecdotal observations. So it's not hard data here, but I've seen this, you've seen this, Paul.
Absolutely. So many times, as you say, sort of with the example of your son, I've seen this in the classroom so many times, that just because some children don't find it as easy to talk or write at length, you therefore don't really get a grasp of how, a solid an understanding they've got. And I think, it's so easy to overlook that, isn't it? So, I mean, what can we do then?
Well, what can we do? Well, I mean, it's interesting. So I was sort of scouring the internet for fairness in assessment. And actually, I came across, I think there was a big sort of dearth of research on fair assessment, basically between 2012, when the General Teaching Council for England was abolished, and 2020, when the pandemic hit and we had to rethink assessment. I'll go back to a hard-hitting General Teaching Council of England report from 2004 called "Perspectives on Pupil Assessment," in which a couple of writers, Gibbs and Stobart, they look at African American students in the US, and they surmise much of performance-based assessment required strong language skills by students to explain or document their accomplishments. It is undeniable that performance assessment is a white middle-class venture promoted by high-achieving people. Now, that was America. That was 2004. So a long time ago in a different place. But in my opinion, in the UK today, not much has changed since then. Again, that's an opinion, but that's how it feels.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, I was reading an article today, only today, one from this year, saying exactly that. These sort of tests actually, in which these sort of literacy and reading are key. Students are often more likely to succeed at if they're from that kind of background. It says, in fact, their quote test scores for these sorts of students are often more indicative of their socioeconomic circumstances than academic potential. So I think perhaps this still rings true today, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. So you're almost like you're born into a test score, aren't you?
Definitely.
So, but you asked what can we do, and that's sort of what I'm getting round to, which is obviously the big decisions are made at the top. So the assessment system that we're given, that's the assessment system that we have to work within. But encouragingly, since COVID, since 2020, various groups like the Independent Assessment Commission or the Secondary Assessment Working Party have produced various reports about fairness in assessment. So it's something that various organisations are looking at and talking to the government about, crucially. The latter of those published a report called Beyond Exam Factories, which looked at various models of testing in other areas, not just school exams, but in areas where it was done in a non pen to paper way, and they sort of drew some conclusions about potential for wider application. So that's encouraging. But in terms of immediate actions a class teacher can take, and I guess this is where we're getting to key takeaways and what our listeners can embed in their own practice, it goes back to the implementation of formative measures to attempt to tease out some inspiration. I mean, really, I guess it goes back to what you were talking about, Paul, with your limitations of assessment, the podcast that we did the other day. So things like assessing presentation work, not seeking an end pen to paper result, seeking verbal responses to questions without pen to paper at the end. There's a theme. Providing online quizzes and games. What about this? Requesting work to be submitted as videos or podcasts as opposed to some sort of written form.
Oh, yeah, that would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they're not necessarily going to improve a student's writing skills. In fact, they probably won't improve a student's writing skills. But we've got to work with what we've got, and if we can do things that engender greater enjoyment and thereby influence written responses, if not improving writing, then that's what we've got to offer at the moment, isn't it?
Definitely. And I would sort of say, even beyond enjoyment, there's a lot of research that's now saying perhaps the way that we assess isn't necessarily prepping our students for the realities of their future jobs. You know, I mean, possibly, I don't know whether you do this, Sam. I haven't picked up a pen and paper in this role. So, you know, we do a lot of videos, don't we? As you say, a video would be great. We do a lot of presentations. So, yeah, are we preparing our students for the future? So I think, yeah, you're right. Using all those different methods would be amazing. So, any final thoughts?
One last thought was this blog that I found by an Australian educator called Karen Cornelia, who advocates for teachers enabling their pupils in reframing their graded results. Yes, everybody wants good outcomes, and this is what teachers and pupils are striving towards achieving. However, sometimes grade hopes are just not met. A student doesn't get the grades that they're looking for or that the teacher is looking for. And it's important that individual students don't see that as a failure. And that's the education system might tell them it's a failure. The system of employment, the world of work might say it's a failure. But it's not. It's simply that their course of learning has enabled them to reach the next step on an educational path, and who knows where that will take them. Thanks for listening, everybody. I think Paul's ducked out. Paul's disappeared. Thanks for listening. We will be back. Make any comments, like, subscribe, do any of those things that you can on whatever channel you find us. We'll be very glad to hear your feedback. Great to be with you, and goodbye for now.